The Secret in the Mysterious Neighborhood. After finishing his first year at university, Jacob returned to the small town where his family had recently moved. Seeking a quieter life away from the city, his family had purchased an old house on a deserted, unfrequented street. Although the neighborhood seemed peaceful from the outside, strange rumors circulated about the neighbors. One evening, while Jacob was reading in his room, he noticed a shadow passing by his window. Peering through the parted curtains, he saw a silhouette watching him from the window of the house across the street. The lights were off, and he couldn't make out the face. This unsettled him, but he decided he was just tired and went to bed. The next day, he tried to meet his neighbors while strolling through the neighborhood. However, everyone was reserved and cold. The old man living next door, Mr. Sullivan, made Jacob particularly uneasy with his stern gazes. It seemed as if no one in the neighborhood wanted to talk much, as if they were hiding a secret. One night, he began hearing strange noises coming from the basement. His family was already asleep. Succumbing to his curiosity, he descended the stairs. The walls were adorned with ancient symbols, and candles were burning on the floor. Suddenly, he heard a whisper behind him, "You shouldn't be here, Jacob." Turning around, he saw Emily, a young woman he'd noticed in the neighborhood, gazing at him from the darkness. "What are you doing here?" Jacob asked in a trembling voice. Emily replied, "This is no ordinary neighborhood. Our neighbors ... they're not human." At that moment, the basement door slammed shut. Mr. Sullivan and the other neighbors entered, holding torches. "Now that you've learned our secret, you're one of us," Mr. Sullivan said with a grin. Jacob tried to escape, but he was surrounded. The neighbor's eyes glowed in the dark, emanating an otherworldly power. Grabbing his hand, Emily said, "If you trust me, we can get out of here." Together, they began escaping through a hidden passage in the basement. The footsteps and murmurs chasing them were terrifying. They emerged at the ruins of an old church at the end of the tunnel. "You can't stay in this cursed place. Leave the town and never return," Emily urged. Jacob quickly gathered his family and left the town. As they drove away, he pondered everything Emily had told him. The neighborhood was the center of an ancient cult, and the neighbors were beings disguised as humans. Emily was a soul who had fallen into the same trap years ago, but hadn't been able to escape. Leaving the city behind, Jacob knew that nothing was as it seemed anymore. Yet, one question gnawed at him. Did I really escape? Glancing at the rearview mirror, he saw Mr. Sullivan's smiling face in the distance. Jacob sped down the road, his heart pounding as if it might burst from his chest. Although he thought he'd left Mr. Sullivan's face behind, the unease wouldn't leave him. He hadn't explained anything to his family, only insisted that they leave town immediately, and the fear in his voice was enough for them to comply without question. But as he remembered Emily's warnings, one thought kept echoing in his mind. Did we really escape? What if this curse still follows us? Later that night, the family decided to stop at an old motel along an empty highway. As soon as Jacob settled into his room, a cold draft swept in under the door. For a moment, his vision darkened, the air in the room grew heavy, and the shadows seemed to shift on their own. From the hallway, he heard footsteps, but these footsteps, they didn't sound human, more like claws tapping slowly on the ground. Suddenly, a shadow appeared at the door. It was Mr. Sullivan. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, and his teeth shone like knives in the dim light. Jacob's breath caught, his heart pounding even faster. The door creaked open slowly, and Mr. Sullivan whispered in a low, echoing voice. "Did you think you could escape, Jacob? No one escapes this curse." Jacob stumbled back, looking around for something to defend himself with. Grabbing a lamp, he hurled it toward the door, but Mr. Sullivan had vanished like a wisp of smoke. In a panic, Jacob ran to his family's room, waking them up and insisting that they leave immediately. They got back in the car, and Jacob slammed his foot on the gas, but the road seemed to stretch endlessly. It was as if they couldn't get any farther from the town, every turn leading them back to the same place. Suddenly, a thick mist began to rise around their car, obscuring the road completely. The mist grew denser, and they stepped out to see where they were. And then, before them, stood a familiar house. "No," Jacob whispered, This is our house." The mist slowly dissipated, revealing Mr. Sullivan standing at the door with the other neighbors. Wide grins spread across their faces, and their eyes shone with a dark gleam. Mr. Sullivan smiled and said, "You can never leave, Jacob. This neighborhood is part of you now." As Jacob backed away in terror, a crack opened beneath his feet. The ground split, and a dark void began pulling him down. His screams echoed into the air, unheard by anyone. As his family disappeared into the darkness, Jacob cried out one last time, "Emily." But Emily was nowhere to be seen. Jacob felt the curse engulfing him completely. Lost in eternal darkness, he was trapped in the shadows of their old neighborhood, forever bound to its secrets. There was no escape.